This video will show and explain how a Mitutoyo U-Wave gauge is used with ProLink's QC-Gage product. This video further assumes that the U-Wave software and drivers have been installed and a U-Wave receiver has been successfully connected to the PC. You would then start by double-clicking on the U-Wave icon on the desktop. Following screen will appear. You'll want to check both of the checkboxes. This will ensure that U-Wave will be set up as a virtual COM port on your PC. This is the recommended method for use with QC-Gage. Click OK, and the following box appears. This box may show an entered value in the top window. This is a registered virtual COM port for the receiver connected to this PC. If it is the first time that you are running the software, this line may be blank, and if it is, you can simply highlight the virtual COM port shown in the bottom window and click the Add button. At this point, it is very important that you make note of the COM port parameters. It is COM port 4 that is currently set up. Yours may be different. It will most likely be the same for the parameters, 57,600 for the baud rate, 0 for the parity or no parity, 8 data bits, 1 stop bit, and RTS-CTS for the flow control. Make note of these values. You will need them later when you configure QC-Gage for use with U-Wave. Click the OK button, and the main U-Wave menu screen will open. You'll want to click on the Setup Start button, and the following screen will appear. The top of this screen will show the virtual COM port number that's being used for the receiver connected to this configuration. To set up a gauge and pair it to the U-Wave receiver, click the Add button, and the following screen will appear. You'll need to enter the device ID. This device ID is found on a sticker on the transmitter connected to your U-Wave gauge. That sticker looks like this window appearing now, and you'll need to enter that value here. You do not need to enter leading zeros. The next window down allows you to assign a channel number. This channel number can be used in QC-Gage to specifically pair this gauge with a particular characteristic in the QC-Gage setup. We're going to set this one for channel number 1. Now you click the OK button, you confirm what you have set, and you'll notice that an entry has now been put into the list of gauges being paired. It does show that it's in channel 1 as we selected. It shows the serial number that we entered, or the device ID, and it's ready for completion of pairing. The completion of pairing takes place when you push the data send button on the gauge one time and then a second time. Once you push it the second time, you will see a blue text at the bottom line, and this will indicate that it's successfully received a number from the gauge. You can test this if you choose to by pressing the send button again and noting that the value shown in the window will be the exact value that is on the gauge. This now completes the pairing of the gauge with the receiver. You'll now exit this screen and exit the main screen. The Mitutoyo U-Wave gauge can very simply be connected to QC-Gage by going to the Tools menu, the Global Gauges option, and in the Global Gauges screen, click the green plus button to add a gauge. U-Wave uses a virtual COM port, and that is the default setting on the gauge setup screen, so you'll leave this the way it is. It wants to have a friendly name. We will call this one caliper number 1. Any number that you might choose to use or any identification can be used for the friendly name. It is referred to other places in the QC-Gage software. Next, you'll need to tell this setup which gauge is being used so that it knows how to read in and parse or separate the data. This drop-down list will show many different brands of gauges, but if you scroll down to the Mitutoyo section, you will find that in the Mitutoyo section, there is a Mitutoyo U-Wave all data. This option is the one you want to choose. And then using the notes you made in the previous step, you'll want to set this to the COM port, to the baud rate, leave the parity set at none, data and stop bits 8 and 1, and change this one to CTS RTS. We can now check the connection between the Mitutoyo U-Wave and Prolink's QC-Gage by opening the COM port. Clicking this button indicates the COM port is open, and when we press the button on the gauge, we will see a value come into these two windows. This is the total data string coming from the gauge, which includes some identification information, and this is just the raw reading coming from the gauge. This is what the parsing is done by this script that we selected here. This proves that we've successfully connected the gauge to our PC and successfully married the gauge to our QC-Gage software. We can close the port, click OK, and click OK. Now we can set this up so that a particular spec plan in QC-Gage utilizes this gauge using U-Wave. We'll right-click on this one and edit the spec plan. This particular spec plan was created in advance but has no gauges assigned. We can verify by going to the gauges setting and the global gauges that is there and ready to go. We could now go to the characteristics, select the characteristic, edit the characteristic, choose the gauge, which is the Mitutoyo U-Wave caliper number 1. Everything else has been previously set up, so we'll simply say OK. We'll finish the spec plan, and now we can launch that spec plan. It will now prompt us for some information and ready for the first reading. We would then make the first reading on the part and push the send button on the gauge. In comes the reading. We could measure a subsequent part, and another reading would come in, and another reading would come in. When we're done, we simply press the finish button and go on to the additional part or close the spec plan. This completes the training and explanation for connecting a Mitutoyo U-Wave to QC-Gage